Well, as always, this year's Commodity Classic here in Orlando, Florida has provided yet another great opportunity for farmers from across America to attend educational sessions, check out an amazing trade show, and of course hear from informative speakers. In fact, this year's keynote speaker was Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack. And Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for being with us. And you know, we could talk literally all day about all sorts of agricultural issues, but I think let's just go ahead and dive into it, because one of the key themes that I've heard this week from corn, soybean, sorghum, and of course wheat growers has been the new Farm Bill and crop insurance, and making sure we keep that very important risk management tool available, especially to those of us out here in the West that have been doing and suffering through multi-years of drought.
No question about it. It's not just crop insurance. It's basically what can we do in addition to crop insurance. You know, as you know, we've had disaster assistance on top of crop insurance the last couple of years, and we looked for a creative way to short circuit and shortcut the time it takes to get emergency relief to farmers under the Emergency Relief Program, which was established by Congress last year. They appropriated $10 billion last year, and we've basically put out, I think, a little over $8 billion of that $10 billion. They appropriated just $3 billion this year, and so obviously our ability to help is going to be a little bit reduced based on the fact that the amount is reduced, but we're still going to use the streamlined process to try to get folks relief as quickly as we can.
How important is it still for these different agricultural commodity groups, like the ones I've mentioned, the ones that are meeting here this week in Orlando, to provide that input to folks like you at the USDA and of course those leaders on Capitol Hill?
Well, obviously it's important in order for the appropriators and people that are fashioning the Farm Bill, the authorizing committees, to understand and appreciate what folks out in the countryside are concerned about. I think that the conversation has to be a bit broader than it would traditionally be. Obviously it continues to focus on risk management, focus on disaster assistance for sure. But there needs to be an additional conversation, and that is, why is it that in a record year in farm income, 90% of farmers either didn't make money or only made enough so that the majority of the money that they did make for their families came from off-farm income? Why is that? And I suggest and think that we need to focus not just on the input costs, not just on the risk management tools, not just on crop insurance and things of that nature, all of which is really important. But we have to broaden the conversation to include, how do we create new ways for farmers to benefit, profit from that farmland? How do we create the ability to take advantage of ecosystem service markets where they're paid for environmental results that they can get by embracing climate smart practices? How do we create ways in which they can use agricultural waste as a product, as an ingredient in some bio-based product that can be manufactured and produced in a rural community? How do we create more ways for them to make money from the same farm? So it's not just the commodity they sell, not just the livestock that they sell, not just the government payment they get, but there are 2, 3, 4, 5 additional ways for farmers to profit. I think if we had that kind of system, then I think farmers would have enough resources, enough capacity that we wouldn't be talking about 90% of farmers not doing as well as they should have in a record year.
Well, we're turning the corner into yet another planting season. Even though there's still some snow up in the northern plains and Rocky Mountain West, those tractors are going to be in the field before we know it. And of course, in the past year, farmers and ranchers have been watching very closely input costs. For farmers specifically, they've really been paying close attention to fertilizer costs. And to that extent, the USDA is making some additional monies available to help encourage more American-made fertilizer. Talk about that, sir.
When we first started this effort as a result of Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, we saw a significant disruption in fertilizer, which resulted in very, very high costs. It occurred to all of us that we needed to be less reliant on Russia and Belarus for fertilizer and more reliant on American ingenuity and manufacturing. So we initially announced a $250 million program. The president directed us to double it at $500 million. And today, here at the Commodity Classic, we've begun the first set of awards. $29 million being awarded to 8 different independently owned businesses in a number of states: Alabama, Colorado, Massachusetts, Washington, Ohio, basically to produce new ways, different ways, expanded ways of addressing the fertilizer shortage. We're going to see more of these announcements over the course of the next several months. And then we have a second commitment of resources that's really designed to address larger scale production capacity that wouldn't necessarily impact the 23 or 24 crop year, but beyond. We saw tremendous interest in that effort. Over $3 billion of applications, 350 independent businesses asking for resources. We obviously got some tough decisions to make, but we're looking forward to spurring additional independently produced, U.S. produced fertilizer.
Mr. Secretary, farmers aren't the only ones meeting this week here in Orlando. Of course, pork industry leaders and volunteer leaders are also meeting here in the Sunshine State as part of the National Pork Industry Forum. And I know one of the big issues that we heard when we took in some of those meetings this week was animal health, for them more specifically, African swine fever. But on the cattle side, I know a lot of folks are wondering about the BSE situation out of Brazil. In fact, Montana Senator John Tester, South Dakota Senator Mike Rounds have recently introduced some legislation to, maybe curb those Brazilian beef imports for the time being. What is USDA thinking about all this BSE animal health issue stuff coming out of South America?
Well, let me first of all address the African swine fever issue, because that is a very serious issue and is a very real issue. We know that it is currently in the Dominican Republic and in Haiti, and we're working with those two governments to try to contain and curtail it and ultimately to eliminate it in those two countries. In the meantime, we've significantly beefed up our biosecurity initiatives here in the U.S. By investing significant resources in canine and individual personnel at the border, making sure that we are not allowing anything that might potentially bring that horrid situation into the U.S. So we're going to continue to be vigilant. On the BSE issue, I think we have to be very, very careful. Very careful. And why do I say that? Because there are different types of BSE. And when you have an atypical case, as is the case with the Brazilian situation, the World Animal Health Organization basically says that's not a basis upon which you should be restricting trade. We had an atypical BSE incident not too long ago out west. And so do we want the rest of the world to stop our beef trade for an atypical case? I don't think we do. So I think we have to be very careful about this particular circumstance and situation, and understanding the distinction between the type of BSE that will really cause a significant problem and one that does not. And again, the World Animal Health Organization has basically been very clear about this, that they draw a very fine line with atypical cases. We'll obviously continue to be monitoring this and be very vigilant about it. But whatever we do to Brazil, the rest of the world can do to the United States. And I think that's why we have to be a bit careful about it.
Last question for my audience out in the West, more specifically. I mean, every year we go through devastating, catastrophic wildfires, and before we know it, we're going to have another wildfire season behind us or ahead of us. And USDA is truly making some tremendous investments out in the West to try to avoid and prepare our rural communities for wildfires.
Hey, I wish it were a wildfire season, but it's now a wildfire year. We don't ever get a respite. And we have to invest more in forest management. And the beauty of this is, with the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, we now have resources to begin a very concerted, concentrated effort in priority landscapes that we've identified. We have identified 21 priority landscapes where we'll be investing almost $1 billion over the next couple of years in treatment. That's thinning, prescribed by a fire, et cetera, to try to better maintain those forests. Within those 21 priority landscapes, we've identified about 134 fire sheds that we think are most at risk. And if you take the right proactive measures, you can significantly reduce the risk of that catastrophic fire. While we're doing that, we're also going to make sure that we provide resources to communities so that they also themselves can be more fire adaptive. And so those grants will be forthcoming here very, very shortly, so that communities out west can begin the process of working with homeowners, working with landowners to make sure that they're preparing their land to reduce the risk. And we're also obviously focused as well on the personnel. It's one thing to be focused on the trees, but you also have to be focused on the people. And we have made a very significant, the president has made a very significant investment proposal in the budget that he just filed where we would increase significantly and make permanent the increases in wildfire salaries. We'd provide better housing for these folks and be able to do a better job of dealing with the stress that they're under. This is an unfortunate circumstance that when I came into office, we learned that firefighters were being paid, some of them were being paid $13 an hour to fight a fire. In other words, they could make more money at a fast food place than fighting a fire. And we were asking those same firefighters after a long, hard day to spend the night in their car. So we have work to do to improve the working conditions, to reduce the stress, and to make sure that they're adequately compensated.
Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for being with us. Again, we've been visiting with the Honorable Tom Vilsack, U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, without question, one of rural America's biggest advocates.